Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to a new edition of Construction Matters with my host, Hamish McLean, of course, Michelle Carr, taking the con out of construction. And today's topic is more about quality than quantity. You see what I did there? And to start us off, of course, Hamish McLean.
Well, we should say what the full title is. And it does actually sort of go back to foundational stuff, doesn't it? Get your groundwork right and there's a better chance of the rest of it being right. But we actually had the title Brick by Brick, Quality Isn't Optional. You put one awry and basically it messes the whole thing up. It doesn't look particularly good either. Strangely, it's harder to put things right after the event. We hear various reports, strangely from my perspective, because in my early learning, which is a good way of putting it, in terms of what we do in providing searches, we made sure that if any planning permissions have been given with conditions, which are called land charges, in my world, if you like, my speak, that there is some element of building control which signs them off. So we were constantly looking for building control. Only to find more recently, and particularly this year, although it did come about last year when we started speaking about cladding matters, that building control isn't exactly what it ought to be. It doesn't exactly control very much, and it depends who is actually carrying it out. So sadly, the quality of what goes on within a build is dependent upon the people who are actually carrying it out. And this is over which there ought to be some element of control. There can be, but we're really moving right into Michelle's territory here because she's the one who spent, as a quantity surveyor, she spent time out on the building sites. I think it was quite a few years ago now when I actually did any work on one. That was whilst I was at college, I think. So that was a long time ago. But Michelle is out there, and obviously things have changed even since when I was there, I would guess. I mean, half a century is quite a while, isn't it? So best we leave it with Michelle to tell us what can be done. What can we do about trying to encourage the quality that we really all desire?
Michelle, it seems to me that a lot of these days, because we this cladding world that we live in, that underneath the cladding could be anything.
Yeah, underneath the cladding, underneath the plasterboard, underneath the skirtings, underneath your cupboards, wherever you want to look, there's always things that you can find. I mean, there is a big, massive, huge misunderstanding in the entire industry, or not even in the industry, just general population, that building control sign of quality, they don't. So I remember I think it might have been on a Cladding Matters podcast before, actually, someone saying that building controllers signed off their house and the cold tap and the hot tap were the wrong way around. And I was like, well, building control wouldn't do that. So building control's roles and responsibilities are purely to make sure that the fire regulations and building regulations have been adhered to. That's it. They don't check quality. They will check, obviously, fire door regulations and whether or not the pink board, which is a fireboard, has been installed, and whether it's 60 minutes or 90 minutes or whatever it is compared to the design, which is designed by an architect. Is
it basically like an MOT? It's basically enough so that it's not going to kill anybody on the road, but it doesn't actually cover quality.
Sort of, yeah, similar. But there are professionals out there that will check quality. For example, building surveyors, quantity surveyors, clerk of works, project managers, architects can do it. But I think the biggest problem is not necessarily checking the quality of the work, it's paying for the quality in the first place. So within the construction industry, you've always got people trying to get cheap. And ultimately, I don't understand, it makes no sense to me, but you're not going to go in and buy £1,000 car and expect it to run like a brand new Porsche or BMW or something like that. Like, you get what you pay for. And it's exactly the same in construction. In fact, it's even worse. If you're buying cheap materials, okay, you have the same thing. Branded materials can be a bit more expensive. But if you're buying cheap materials, cheap labor, you're not paying for decent and qualified professionals, then that's where you're going to end up cutting corners, and it's going to end up costing you money in the long run.
So it's about doing it completely to the brief rather than just enough to get away with it.
Well, I mean, it's fair. It goes all the way back to from the concept of whatever project you're doing, whether it be personal, whether it be a development, whether it be an extension, whether it's a new bathroom. It's about getting it designed properly in the first place. And whether that for a bathroom, I wouldn't expect you to go to an architect, but you might go to a kitchen or bathroom designer or something like that. So getting the design right in the first place makes a difference. Specifying what you want and the materials makes a difference. Right. Ensuring that you've got professionals there to advise you if you don't know what you're doing and what you're talking about. I mean, my profession is probably the worst because people don't understand the value of a quantity surveyor, but actually we're the only profession in the construction industry that actually has an ROI. I save my clients some damn sight more money than I cost them, and I always have done. And a decent QS will do that, the same as an accountant. They will save you money more than they cost on an annual basis, year after year after year. QSs are exactly the same, decent ones anyway. So people won't spend out for a QS because they don't understand the value. So it's making sure people will cut a cost, but they don't understand the value and value engineering, all these other things to make sure that what you're getting is what you need, and you're spending money where you need to. And the places that you need to spend money depend on the project and depends on your circumstances. But it's making sure you've got the design, the specification, then of course you've got to do your due diligence to make sure that the contractors that you're using are decent contractors. Have them in a good contract. So if there are any issues, you've got to come back to get them to rectify it. And also get someone to sign off their work, whether that be a QS or the architect or whoever. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but somebody that is impartial needs to sign these works off if you're not qualified to do it yourself.
And interesting enough, we talked about that, I think, in the podcast that you made called Taking the Con Out of Construction, second episode about to drop tomorrow at midday. So taking the con out of, sorry, Hamish, just a sneaky, it's dropping tomorrow midday. It's called Taking the Con Out of Construction, available wherever you get your podcasts from, Apple, iTunes, carrier pigeons, whatever. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Hamish, you must notice time and time again, even at the end that you inhabit, the search group, that if you don't get the right people to do the job, you end up with a half-assed result.
Oh, absolutely. Just going back to one of the comments that you made about MOTs, and Michelle's observation that it isn't quite the same as an MOT. Put it in perspective. I had a serious accident some years ago, 2 weeks after I had my MOT, and I actually blacked out and had the accident.
Right.
And I was found guilty of driving a vehicle with the inappropriate brakes because the guy that inspected the written off vehicle that crashed into the wall maintained that the brakes were faulty. You know, he couldn't say whether they were faulty before the accident or after the accident, but they decided to find me guilty anyway. So there we go. That was just a brief aside. I think we are dependent on professionals so much in life, and we would hope that by making a particular choice, sometimes we are guided down it by someone. Oh, you ought to get in touch with so-and-so. And very often we actually sort of hear, for example, if an estate agent tells you to speak to a solicitor, it's not necessarily a good idea because they might be doing it because they're getting a backhander, not necessarily because the solicitor is going to speed things up. Now, it's exactly the same in everything that we actually sort of do. It was quite interesting. I just caught sight of an article earlier, and it's something that Michelle would appreciate, to suggest that small to medium-sized builders they're basically drifting away. They're drifting away. We're losing many of them who we could rely upon for good quality work. And as we well know, the serious flaws that we have, particularly in cladding, because that's the ones that have been measured more recently, are by, in actual fact, the big builders who have been attempting to cut corners.
Absolutely.
One of the saddest things to me, and just a brief mention of Royal Artillery Quays, is the fact that the stairways do not have any fire doors. And it's the council who basically could actually be saying something about, but the council have to pay for the fire doors. So is there a conflict of interest there? I mean, can they condemn the property because it's inappropriately built? They should be doing it. The fire officers are a bit peculiar about the whole thing because they've condemned one, but they've left the other 7 fire stairwells perfectly okay. They're all right without fire doors, apparently. But anyway, that's by the by, just observations. However, it is that quality that counts.
Have you noticed, Michelle, that there's been, since pandemic, that there's been, as Hamish says, a massive decrease in the number of small private builders?
Yeah, a lot of them have gone bust.
And is that because of the knock-on from the pandemic, or is it something else?
I don't know if it's got anything to do with the pandemic.
Okay.
I think it was happening way before then. I think, yes, it depends on what you class as a knock-on from the pandemic. I mean, the fact that we've got this crisis or price crisis or cost crisis or cost of living crisis, whatever you want to call it, which I just don't understand, because it started with the price of fuel going through the roof, and the price of fuel has gone back to how it was, but we're still apparently in a cost of living crisis. I don't get it. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. I think there's expenses and stuff, but primarily I think one of the biggest issues in the construction industry, which is that small builders are getting ripped off. They're getting ripped off by main contractors, bigger contractors. I've mentioned a few times about a number of companies I know that have gone bust recently, which is frustrating because I know I can stop that and I can help. Subcontractors, primarily, regardless of the size, generally don't know the law. They don't understand the way that it works. They don't understand contracts. They don't often read contracts, or they get sent a contract and they don't read it and they don't sign it, whatever. And therefore, when they don't get paid. I mean, there was a communication or somebody wrote a post on LinkedIn about 60 and 90-day payments, and that's quite common in the industry. But what happens is when people are struggling with cash flow, they potentially get invoice factoring, or they get some form of finance that is 30-day payments, but then they don't account for the cost of that in their schedules and in their rates, etc. And then all of a sudden the finance company gets spooked for whatever reason and they pull the plug. And that's the worst thing you can ever do to a construction company, is stop their funding, because ultimately they need to get to the end of the job to get the final payment, or they need to keep going a little bit of time because they'll get retention release, or it's just about getting to the end of the job when the money comes. But also final accounts and other things like that. Now, some people will use quality as an excuse. That's normally the main excuse, a lack of quality, but they don't back it up. I mean, one of my clients came to me yesterday, and they've been stopped 52,000 out of a 220,000 contract.
What?
No reason whatsoever.
That's 25% reduction just because they felt like it.
And it's also the contract works finished 3 months ago, and it's a minor works contract. So there's only 28 days. So can I help them? Of course I can, because they're out of time, and I'm going to send them a very, very shoppy letter, and no doubt they'll be paid within a fortnight, if that. If they're not, then God help them. But people don't understand what they're fighting for, don't understand the rights. People don't understand the specification. People don't understand variations and how they're supposed to apply for variations. And yeah, it's getting nastier and nastier and nastier out there, and the big boys seem to be making more and more money, and a lot of the little people are giving up because I do some work with Root Home, as you know, and the amount of contractors that want to work with us, because they're smaller projects but they get paid on time and they're fast turnarounds, and they don't want to do the big projects. They don't want to wait 90 days for the money anymore, and so many people are coming out of that industry because the payment terms are so bad. Yeah,
the plaudits to Root Home, actually. They make a big thing about paying their contractors on time, and dare I say, that's becoming less usual in the industry.
Well, not even on time. I mean, these guys have I agree 7-day payments, and they're paid within 24, 48 hours. I mean, one of them still grumbles about it regularly, but
of course.
But yeah, there's companies that I literally on LinkedIn saying that they're waiting 90 days to get paid. And how are you supposed to maintain quality at that rate when you're paying your staff on a weekly, 2-weekly, monthly at bare minimum? You're paying for your supplies, you're paying for your materials, and then you're waiting 90 days to pay for stuff. That is another thing. Quality will end up lowering because they're just not making any money. And if you quote something on a proviso, you're getting paid in 30 days, and then you're paying for 2 or 3 months worth of credit, that's when people have to start cutting corners because they've been pushed to.
Right.
So there is an aspect of that into quality issues, I think, as well.
Hamish, it seems like an impossible situation. We've got a decreasing number of well practiced and practitioners of the craft of building things well, and at the same time, the ones that are out there not being paid on time.
I think it's one of the sad aspects. It does come back to, and a lot of this has actually been said in various podcasts we've actually spoken in,
Yes.
more particularly to do with the cladding matters, that really it is up to, at the end of the day, if we cannot rely on the quality of what are meant to be the best builders because they are the biggest no longer means best. And in actual fact, it has been demonstrated that very often they are far, far from it. Although they get plaudits all over the place because of the quality. I can't understand how people repetitively are giving the big companies all of these stars when they're undercutting. They were, as Michelle is likely to has indicated there's every chance they could be actually trying to get cheap labor as well as putting that cheap material together. And we know in certain instances that they're doing things like using the cheaper quality material, they're using cheap labor, and they end up with, instead of having a nice solid wall, there's little compartments with cans of Coke and the rest of it. And that is the quality of the people involved. Brick by brick, quality is important. It's the way if you put it down there. And if you pay for the right quality, as Michelle says, you're going to get it in the end. And for heaven's sake, when it's possible to draw the attention and get somebody like Michelle to come along, just to keep her, knowing that Michelle is going to turn up. And of course, the world's worst thing is, like the building control guy say, I'll pop round for a coffee. Next Tuesday at 10. And so what do? They have a lovely cup of coffee at 10. And of course, everybody knows they're coming. So everybody's on their best behavior and make sure anything underhand is kept completely out of the way.
As everybody can see, I put a ticker on the bottom. If people want to get in touch with Michelle and pick her brain, she's a very good starting point if you've got an issue to do with construction. h2construction.uk/founder, and she'll, I'm sure, give you some time. Until next week, thank you for spending time with us. Thank you, Hamish McLeod, Serge Convey, Michelle Carr, of course, taking the con out of construction, a podcast available. We're dropping them every Wednesday at midday. Do check them out. There'll be a post hopefully later on today to promote it still further. Definitely worth a listen. Available to you everywhere at the moment entirely for free. So I would take advantage of that. Until next week, keep your feet on the ground, keep you reaching for the stars, and try and look after that mental health. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.